The day I walked into that room and watched my wife get arrested, I was wearing the same suit I wore to my mother's funeral. I didn't plan it that way. But standing there, watching federal agents put their hands on her shoulders while 200 people stared in silence, I thought, this is what the end of a lie looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold and final. But let me take you back, because what happened that afternoon didn't start in that room. It started 6 weeks earlier, in my own home, at my own dinner table, and I didn't even know I was already losing. My name is Marcus Osei. I built a real estate empire from nothing. Came to this country from Ghana with $60 and a contact number that turned out to be disconnected. I slept on a cousin's couch in Atlanta for 8 months. I worked 3 jobs. I saved. I studied. I built. And by the time I was 50 years old, the Marcus Osei Foundation had put over 3,000 young people through college. That was my life's work. That was me. So when I started forgetting things, I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself I'd earned the right to slow down a little. I remember sitting in a boardroom, staring at a document I had read 100 times, and the words kept sliding off the page. My assistant, a young man named Kevin, looked at me with this expression, careful, like he was watching something fragile, and said, "Mr. Osei, do you need a minute?" And I laughed it off. "Kevin, I've been running circles around men twice your size for 30 years. I'm fine." But on the drive home that evening, my driver asked me what I thought about the new building, the one we just opened, the one I had personally named after my mother. And I sat in the back of that car, and I could not, for the life of me, pull her name out of my head. I stared out the window the rest of the way home and said nothing. When I got inside, Vivienne was waiting in the hallway, my wife, polished, as always, warm smile, smelling like that perfume I bought her in Paris. She kissed my cheek and said, "You look tired, baby. Come eat." And after dinner, she did what she'd done every evening for 6 weeks. She handed me my medication, 2 white pills and a green capsule. "Dr. Harmon updated your protocol," she told me. "The green one is the new vitamin. He says it'll help with the fatigue." I trusted her. I put them in my mouth and swallowed. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that those pills were quietly, methodically, turning me into a different person, erasing me from the inside out. Not to kill me, that would have been too simple. What Vivienne wanted was something worse. She wanted to own me while I was still breathing. Now, before I go any further, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story I'm about to tell you is one of the most disturbing things I've ever lived through, and I promise you, you do not want to miss what happens next. Here's what was actually happening inside my home. Vivienne had secretly filed for a court competency hearing, the kind that, if granted, strips a person of their legal right to make decisions, financial, personal, all of it. If the court declared me mentally unfit, control of my foundation would transfer to a court-appointed trustee, and Vivienne had already picked the trustee. She had already picked the lawyer who would argue the case. She had already lined up to paid medical witnesses who would testify that I was deteriorating. She had even moved money quietly, in small amounts, preparing for the transition. The hearing was 14 days away, and I was home every evening, swallowing her plan with a glass of water, saying thank you. But there was one thing Vivienne didn't account for. Her name was Amara. Amara was 17 years old. Her father, Mr. Asante, had been my groundskeeper for 11 years. She did her homework in the garden most evenings, because she said the house she shared with her father felt too small for her brain. She was quiet. She observed everything, and nobody, not Vivienne, not Daniel, nobody ever paid attention to the groundskeeper's daughter sitting in the garden with her textbooks on an evening that changed everything. Amara looked up from her homework and heard Vivienne's voice drifting from the side terrace. She was on the phone, and Amara heard her say, clear as glass, "The hearing is in 14 days. Just keep him on schedule, and he'll barely be able to spell his own name by then." Amara told me later that she sat very still for almost a full minute. She didn't fully understand what she'd heard, but something in her, something instinctive, made her grab her phone. She pressed record, and she caught the last 10 seconds of the call. including Vivienne's sign-off. Trust me, he suspects nothing. That night I collapsed at the dinner table, not dramatically. I didn't fall to the floor. I just went somewhere else for a moment. My head dropped. My fork slipped. When I came back, Vivienne's hand was on my arm and her face was arranged in perfect concern. Another episode, she told Daniel on the phone afterward, behind the closed door of the hallway. I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I did, and her voice, I'll never forget this. Her voice was satisfied, like a woman checking a box. It's working faster than expected, she said. The next morning, I was in the garden early. I couldn't sleep. I was sitting with a book I couldn't read, watching the sunrise, feeling like I was behind glass, present, but somehow not there. And Amara came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat. Then she looked at me and said, "Mr. Osei, I need to show you something. And I need you to promise me you won't react until I'm done." I looked at the 17-year-old girl, and something in her eyes, serious, almost old, made me put the book down. She played me the recording. I listened once. I said, "Play it again." She did. I sat with it for what felt like a long time. And then something inside me went very quiet and very clear. Not anger, not yet. Something colder than anger. Something that felt like the moment you finally see the shape of the thing that has been stalking you in the dark. I said, "I need to call my lawyer." Amara shook her head. "Mr. Osei," she paused. "Miss Vivienne had lunch with your lawyer last Thursday. His car was in the driveway for 2 hours. I looked at her. "I see everything from this garden," she said simply. I started building the picture then. My lawyer, my personal doctor, the one who had been adjusting my prescriptions, adding the new protocol. My son Daniel, who had been calling more than usual, always with that particular careful tone of someone managing a situation. All of them inside the circle, all positioned before the hearing. The fog wasn't a symptom. It was a schedule. Then Amara reached into her jacket pocket and placed something in my hand. A small Ziploc bag. Inside it were several green capsules. She said, "You spit them out sometimes without realizing. Into your napkin. Into the plant by the dinner table. I've been collecting them for about a week." I didn't know why. I just knew something was wrong. I stared at that bag for a long time. Medication I had taken from my wife's hand, every evening, with a smile, a kiss on the cheek. "Your health matters to me, baby," right there and then I made my decision. I would keep taking the white pills, those were real. But from that evening forward, the green capsule went in my mouth and came back out when no one was looking. And within 36 hours, I want you to understand what happened. I started remembering, not slowly, in waves. A meeting I thought I had forgotten. I hadn't forgotten it. I had been unable to access it through the chemical wall she was building around my mind. Every single day, documents I thought I had misread. I had read them perfectly. My foundation's financials, my board communications, my legal records, all of it coming back like water rushing into a dry riverbed. The fog was never mine. It was given to me by a woman I called my wife. But here is where it got dangerous. Vivienne noticed. It was subtle, nothing I could have seen in the moment. But she was watching me the way a scientist watches an experiment. That evening at dinner, she studied the way I held my glass after taking my pills. She couldn't name what was different, but she felt it. And Vivienne was not a woman who sat with uncertainty. That night she called Daniel. I heard her from the hallway. "Something's off. Watch him tomorrow, and call the court clerk first thing in the morning. I want that hearing moved up 3 days. The clock I thought I had 14 days on had just become 11. The next afternoon, Daniel came to see me. He sat across from me in the study with the posture of a man who had rehearsed this conversation. And he said, "Dad, I think it's time to consider stepping back from the foundation, voluntarily, before the board is forced to make a harder decision. For your health." I looked at my son, the boy I had put through school, the boy I had watched grow up, and I felt something break very quietly inside me, not from surprise, because by then I already knew. What broke was the last small hope that he hadn't chosen this freely. I let him finish, and then I asked, casually, almost gently, "When did you say the board meeting was scheduled?" Daniel blinked. "Thursday, at He stopped. The color left his face. Because I had never told him about a board meeting. I hadn't mentioned it, hadn't sent a notice, hadn't discussed it with anyone except my assistant. Vivienne had briefed him, and in one unguarded second, he'd confirmed it. I said, "Thank you, son," nothing else. He left believing he had handled that conversation well. He had just handed me the last piece of the puzzle. The board had been briefed. Vivienne had been working that room for weeks, quietly, methodically, planting seeds of doubt with the people who held the power to formally remove me. She wasn't just filing a legal hearing. She was building a consensus, making sure that by the time that hearing happened, the board would be ready to agree, ready to sign, ready to let her step in as the steady hand while poor Marcus declined. I sat alone in my study for 20 minutes after Daniel left. I thought about my mother. I thought about the $60 I arrived with. I thought about every early morning and every late night and every sacrifice that had built the institution she was trying to take from me. And I thought about Amara sitting in that garden, phone in hand, recording a conversation that was never meant for her ears. I made a decision. I was not going to fight to survive. I was going to fight to win. Now I want you to hit that like button right now if you're feeling what I was feeling in that moment, because this story is about to shift. And what comes next is where everything turns. I contacted Dr. Elaine Ford through Amara's personal phone. Elaine was my oldest friend from college, a retired psychiatrist, sharp as she had ever been, and one of the few people in my life whose number wasn't in any system Vivienne could access. I told her everything in 12 minutes. She said, "For words, I'm on my way." The next morning, a social worker named Agent Cruz showed up at my gate with a clipboard and a government lanyard, under the banner of a routine senior wellness check. Vivienne had arranged it through a contact at the county office. Time to create an official record of me appearing confused, dependent, and unfit. One more layer of documentation before the hearing. But Dr. Ford had arrived 20 minutes earlier. She intercepted Agent Cruz at the gate as a professional peer, introduced herself, expressed that she was in the middle of a clinical consultation with me, and that any formal welfare assessment would need to be rescheduled to avoid compromising the integrity of an ongoing evaluation. Agent Cruz had no grounds to push back. She rescheduled. Vivienne had no idea. While she believed I was upstairs resting, Amara and I slipped out through the garden gate and drove to Elaine's house. On the other side of town, Elaine had already called Jerome, our church pharmacist, a meticulous and deeply trustworthy man. Jerome took one look at those green capsules and spent 3 hours in his back lab. What he found was a combination of sedatives and a dissociative compound, the kind of thing that, administered daily over weeks, would present in a patient exactly like early-stage dementia. It was not in any prescription I had ever been given. It was being administered off the books, off record, in secret, with a smile and a glass of water every evening. Jerome documented all of it, signed, dated, with full chemical notation. Elaine pulled my real medical history, no diagnosis, no legitimate clinical basis for any of what I had been given. Nothing. Amara's recording, Vivienne's voice, time-stamped, Daniel's unwitting confirmation about the board meeting. And then I remembered something. 2 years earlier, after a nasty business dispute with a former partner who denied everything until I produced recordings he didn't know existed, I had installed an independent cloud recorder in my home office, completely off the estate's main security system, accessible only through a private login I had memorized and kept nowhere on paper. But the physical access token, a small USB device stored in a hidden compartment in my office desk, was still at the house. I needed that token, and I could not go back there without raising every alarm Vivienne had. I looked at Amara. She was sitting at Elaine's kitchen table, textbooks open like none of this was happening, like she hadn't just turned her entire life upside down to help a man who employed her father. She looked up at me and said, before I could even speak, "Tell me what you need." I told her. She nodded once, stood up, said, "I'll be back in 20 minutes. She walked back to the estate alone, told her father she forgot her school bag. He asked if she wanted him to come with her. She said no, it'll take 2 minutes. and smiled at him in a way she told me later felt like a lie, because she loved her father, and she was walking into something she hadn't told him about, and she didn't know how it was going to end. She walked through the front gate, through the garden she had grown up in, past Vivienne's study, where the light was on, and she could hear Vivienne on another phone call, voice low and controlled. She did not run. She did not hesitate. She walked the way a person walks when they belong somewhere, unhurried, ordinary, invisible. She went into my office, crossed to the desk, found the hidden compartment exactly where I had described it, took the USB, and then Vivienne's study door opened. Amara told me she heard the handle turn and felt her entire body go cold. She tucked the USB into her waistband, picked up her school bag from the chair where she had deliberately left it before going to Elaine's that morning, and turned around. Vivienne was standing in the doorway. Amara, what are you doing in here? Amara held up the bag. Sorry, Miss Vivienne. I left this earlier when I was dusting. I didn't want Mr. Osei to think I was being careless with his space. For seconds of silence. Then Vivienne said, Fine, go ahead. Amara walked past her, down the hallway, out the front door, through the gate, round the corner. And then, and only then, she leaned against a wall and let herself shake for 30 seconds. She was 17 years old when she handed me that USB at Elaine's kitchen table. I held it for a second, and then I looked at her and I thought, this child just risked more for me than people I have known for 40 years. When she handed me that USB at Elaine's kitchen table, I held it for a second, and then I looked at her and thought, this child just risked more for me than people I have known for 40 years. I plugged the token in and accessed the cloud recorder remotely from Elaine's laptop. The footage loaded. And there they were, Vivienne and Daniel, in my office, sitting at my desk, going over the competency hearing filing together. Vivienne was walking him through the timeline, the witnesses, the sequence of the court presentation. She was calm, organized, thorough. And then Daniel said something I couldn't quite hear on the recording, and Vivienne laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not the laugh of someone under pressure, a comfortable, easy, fully relaxed laugh. The laugh of someone who believed they had already won, who was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I watched that clip twice. I didn't say anything. Elaine put her hand over mine. I looked at her and said, Call Mensah. Attorney Mensah was the Foundation's federal compliance attorney. He had reviewed our nonprofit filings every year for 7 years. He wasn't a favor I was calling in. He was an institution whose job was to protect the foundation I had built, and what had been done to that foundation was something he took personally. I heard it in his voice within the first 2 minutes of the call. He was furious. Quietly, professionally, completely furious. By midnight he had reviewed all the evidence, confirmed with a federal contact that we had enough to move, and filed an emergency counter motion with the court. Vivienne's accelerated hearing was now contested with federal backing. Her prearranged medical witnesses were about to face the pharmaceutical documentation Jerome had prepared, and for the following afternoon, the Foundation's annual stakeholder luncheon, an event Vivienne absolutely could not cancel without triggering board suspicion. Mensah coordinated to federal agents who would be in the room before anyone arrived. I did not sleep that night, but for the first time in 6 weeks, the sleeplessness was mine. It came from clarity, not fog. And there is a difference. The luncheon was held at the Foundation's main building. 200 people, board members, donors, partners, people who had believed in what I built. Vivienne arrived in a cream dress, composed, already working the room. She had positioned herself next to 2 board allies she had been quietly cultivating for months. She was performing. I could see it now with total clarity, every gesture, every concerned glance toward the door where she expected to see me helped in by an assistant. Unsteady, diminished, I walked in alone. I watched her see me from across the room. Her smile didn't fall. She was too controlled for that. But something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked, just for a fraction of a second, like fear. I straightened my jacket and walked to the podium. I thanked the board. I spoke about the Foundation's work that year, the scholarships, the communities we had served. The young people whose lives had changed. I meant every word of it. That part was real. Then I said, before we continue, I need to share something with everyone in this room. Something you deserve to see. I nodded toward the AV station where Elaine was seated beside Attorney Mensah. The screen came on. The footage ran. Vivienne and Daniel in my office. The timeline. The witnesses. The filing. And then the laugh. That easy, comfortable laugh in my chair, at my desk, planning the end of everything I had built. 200 people watched it in complete silence. Then Amara's recording played through the room's speakers. Vivienne's voice, the voice that had handed me my medication every evening with a warm smile, filling the entire hall. He'll barely be able to spell his own name by then. Jerome stood and walked to the Foundation's legal counsel directly, evidence folder in hand. The room was absolutely silent. Vivienne pushed back her chair. She stood up. Her voice, when she found it, was controlled. She said, "Marcus, this is Attorney." Mensah stepped forward. He was flanked by two federal agents who had been seated near the back of the room since the event opened. They walked toward Vivienne with the particular calm of people who have done this before and feel nothing except certainty. Daniel didn't stand, didn't speak. He sat in his chair like a man watching the walls of a building he built come down, knowing he had no one to blame but himself. Every single choice he had made over 3 months was landing on him at once, and he just sat there and took the weight of it. I watched my wife escorted out of the room I built, past the portraits of the young people my foundation had sent to college, through the doors of the institution that was always going to be mine. The charges were fraud, elder financial abuse, and criminal conspiracy to manipulate a legal competency proceeding. When it was over, when the crowd had cleared and the room had gone quiet, I found Amara near the exit. She was standing slightly apart from everything, small, uncertain, like someone who had run a marathon and wasn't sure if she was allowed to sit down yet. She had no official role in any of this, no title, no stake except the one she chose to take on because it was the right thing to do. I walked over to her. I didn't offer her money. I didn't make a speech. I just looked at her and said, "Your father raised someone remarkable. I want to make sure you know that." She looked at the floor for a second, then back up at me, and she nodded once, the way young people nod when they are trying not to cry in public. That was enough. I went home that evening, my home, my office, my desk, and I sat down and I signed documents for 2 hours. Steady hand, clear mind, no fog. The evidence bag with the green capsules sat on the corner of my desk, tagged and ready for the prosecutor. I looked at it once, and then I looked away and I kept working. Here's what I need you to take from this story. The most dangerous weapon in the world is one that is handed to you with love. Because you don't question love. You swallow it. You say thank you. You go to sleep trusting that the person who says they care about you would never use that. Trust is the method of your destruction. Most people who are victimized the way I was never find out. They just slowly become less of themselves, and the people around them call it aging, call it decline, call it time, and the people who engineered it stand by and watch and inherit everything. I found out because a 17-year-old girl was sitting in a garden, doing her homework and paying attention. Never underestimate the person nobody is watching. Never underestimate the witness who has no agenda, no history, no stake, except conscience. Because sometimes conscience is the most powerful thing in any room. If this story hit you the way I hope it did, I want you to do 3 things right. Now subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell here is this real, this deep, and this human. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? Was it the pills in Amara's pocket? Was it Daniel's laugh in that office? Was it the silence in that room when the footage played? Tell me, and share this video with one person who you think needs to hear it. Not because of the drama, because of what it says about who we choose to trust and who chooses to protect. The fog is gone. My hands are steady, and I am still, completely, entirely myself.